Welcome to a gripping tale set in the bustling corridors of Hartfield International Airport, where thousands of travelers weave through the bright, sprawling terminal under the ever-watchful eye of airport security. At first glance, today seems like just another routine travel day. Our protagonist, a passionate and accomplished professional, is en route to an important destination, unaware that her journey is about to take a shocking turn. When she is singled out for an unexpected and invasive search, tensions ignite, exposing deep-seated biases. Hearts race, secrets unravel, and fate delivers swift, unexpected justice in the most astonishing way. This is a story of resilience, reckoning, and redemption. Naomi Carter woke before dawn. She had an early flight from Atlanta to San Diego, where she was set to deliver a keynote address at a prestigious academic symposium, an opportunity that could elevate her career to new heights. As a community leader, author, and speaker, Naomi often gave lectures on social justice, youth empowerment, and education reform. But this invitation felt different. The University of California, San Diego had asked her to headline their annual public policy forum. If it went well, doors could open to the university teaching career she had long dreamed of. Determined to be prepared, Naomi meticulously double-checked everything: phone, laptop, charger, identification, and her carefully organized speech notes. As she packed, the first rays of morning sunlight bathed her cozy downtown apartment in gold. A familiar excitement hummed in her chest, the thrill of travel, the promise of new conversations, new faces, new opportunities. Soon, her taxi wove through the early morning streets of Atlanta, where the city was slowly waking up. Through the window, she observed delivery trucks unloading goods, an eager line forming at a corner coffee shop, and a jogger crossing the street with headphones on. The world was coming alive, and she was ready to embrace the day. The closer they got to the airport, the quicker Naomi's heart fluttered, not with fear, but anticipation. As the taxi pulled into Terminal 3 of Hartfield International Airport, she took a deep breath, feeling both grateful and confident. Inside the terminal, crowds were already gathering. She breezed through the self-check-in kiosks, dropped off her luggage, and made her way toward the security checkpoint, where a substantial line had already formed, even at 6 a.m. Clutching her sleek black carry-on, filled with clothes and research materials, Naomi reassured herself that she had plenty of time. Her flight wouldn't board for another 2 hours, giving her a comfortable buffer. As she glanced around, she took in the usual airport chaos. Weary travelers clutching steaming cups of coffee, families wrangling strollers and restless toddlers, business people buried in their phones, checking emails or making last-minute calls. An invisible current of anxiety and urgency always ran through airports. Everyone just wanted to get through security without hassle and reach their gate in peace. For Naomi, traveling had always been predictable, if sometimes stressful. But this morning felt different. Something about the atmosphere was subtly off. A nagging unease gnawed at her, though she couldn't quite put her finger on why. She chalked it up to pre-speech jitters. But what she didn't know was that this would be no ordinary travel day. Fate was about to entangle her in a web of events that would test her patience, principles, and courage in ways she never imagined. The TSA security line at Hartfield International always moved at a glacial pace, inching forward like a slow-moving tide. Naomi removed her shoes, placed her laptop in a separate bin, and carefully set her jacket and belt aside, just as protocol required. A TSA officer motioned her forward into the full-body scanner. Arms raised, she stood still as the machine whirred to life. A moment later, the screen signaled that everything was clear. She stepped forward, relieved that she had passed through seamlessly. Quickly retrieving her carry-on and personal items, she moved toward a nearby bench to lace up her shoes. But as she bent down, she noticed something out of the corner of her eye: a uniformed police officer approaching the security checkpoint. Something about him put her on edge. The officer was an older, heavy-set man, his stern expression shadowed beneath the brim of his cap. His name tag read Officer Grayson. His cold, calculating gaze swept across the crowd, as if searching for something or someone. It wasn't uncommon to see airport police patrolling near security checkpoints, but there was something unsettling about the way he carried himself. Travelers instinctively parted around him, as if sensing his readiness to pounce on the slightest provocation. Naomi, still tying her sneakers, briefly locked eyes with him. A ripple of unease crawled up her spine. She quickly looked away, brushing off the discomfort. She had places to be, a plane to catch, a speech to give. Besides, she had done nothing wrong. Still, she couldn't shake the strange feeling settling in her chest. And in the next few minutes, she'd find out exactly why. The officer's presence loomed like a storm cloud over the security checkpoint. While airport police were a common sight, Officer Grayson carried an imposing air, the kind that made people instinctively step aside. It was as if travelers could sense his readiness to pounce at the first sign of trouble. Naomi, still crouched down lacing her sneakers, caught his piercing gaze for the briefest second. A strange unease flickered through her. Then she dismissed it. She had places to be, a speech to deliver, a flight to catch. She stood, reaching for her carry-on the conveyor belt. But before she could take a step, "Miss, hold on a second." The barked command sent a jolt through her spine. She turned, pulse quickening. Had she dropped something? The officer approached with slow, deliberate steps, his eyes scanning her from head to toe like he was searching for a flaw, a reason to justify what was about to happen. "I need to check your bag." A flicker of confusion crossed Naomi's face. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, keeping her tone even. "Random check. Step aside, please." His words were curt, but the speed and certainty of his demand made it feel anything but random. A tense breath filled Naomi's chest. She'd traveled enough to know additional screenings happened from time to time, but something about the way he had zeroed in on her after she had already cleared TSA didn't sit right. A younger, nervous-looking TSA employee hesitated nearby. "Officer, should I run her bag through the scanner again?" the agent offered. Grayson shook his head. "No, I'll do a manual search." The words made Naomi's stomach tighten. He motioned her toward a nearby inspection table, separate from the main security line. A hush fell over the immediate area. People began to notice. Some passengers slowed their steps, stealing quick glances as they shuffled away, some out of curiosity, others with wary unease. No one wanted to get too close. Naomi, keeping her head high, placed her carry-on the table and gave the officer a polite smile, hoping to diffuse whatever hostility lingered beneath his sharp gaze. "Of course, go ahead." She had nothing to hide. And yet, an uneasy dread pooled in her stomach, whispering that this was the start of something much bigger. With brisk, practiced movements, Grayson unzipped Naomi's suitcase. She stood perfectly still, watching as he methodically rummaged through her neatly folded clothes. One by one, he lifted items, inspecting them unnecessarily. A rolled-up sweater? He unfolded it, patted it down, then tossed it aside. Her toiletry bag? He unzipped it with a snap, scanning her face cream, deodorant, and toothpaste as if expecting to find something more sinister. Naomi forced herself to remain calm, even as tension simmered beneath her composed expression. It wasn't just the act of searching, it was how he did it. The way he dug through her belongings felt accusatory, as though he were waiting for contraband to magically appear from the depths of her suitcase. More travelers passed by, casting furtive glances toward the scene. Nearby, a mother with 2 small children gently guided them away, as if avoiding a brewing conflict. A businessman in a crisp, tailored suit frowned but said nothing, his gaze flickering with discomfort. Naomi remained motionless, every second stretching unbearably. Then, Grayson's hand stilled over her laptop. "What's on here?" Grayson asked bluntly, flipping the laptop in his hands. Naomi arched an eyebrow. "Work files, mostly presentations. I'm traveling to UCSD for a symposium." Grayson gave a short grunt, as if unimpressed. He turned the device over, examining it for hidden compartments. When he found nothing, he set it aside, but Naomi could see the glint of frustration in his eyes. A bead of sweat trickled down her temple. This was overkill. She'd been through random inspections before, but something about this felt different. This wasn't just about protocol, this was personal. "Officer," she said carefully, "is there a reason you're being so thorough?" His cold eyes flicked up to meet hers. "Just following procedure." His dismissive tone told her that questioning him further would lead nowhere. She swallowed down the urge to push back. If she argued, if she let frustration spill into her words, it could escalate. She wasn't about to give him an excuse. Grayson continued his search, rifling through the bottom layer of her bag. His fingers landed on a folder, one stuffed with handwritten notes, project outlines, and the final version of her keynote speech. Naomi inhaled sharply as he flicked through the pages, his fingers carelessly disrupting her meticulous organization. She had spent hours putting everything in order. The sight of her hard work being manhandled like an afterthought sent a pang of frustration through her chest. After what felt like an eternity, Grayson sighed and began repacking the bag. Naomi almost let herself exhale in relief, until she saw his eyes narrow. Tucked near the side of her suitcase was a small black pouch, a simple case she used for storing pens, USB drives, and small essentials. Grayson snatched it up with fresh intensity. Naomi started to speak. "That's just supplies." But he ignored her, unzipping the pouch with sharp precision. His eyes narrowed further as he pulled out 2 USB sticks. He held them up between his fingers. "And these?" Naomi's throat went dry. "Backups," she answered calmly. "They contain my presentation slides and some articles. If you'd like to check them, you'll probably need specialized equipment." A heavy silence stretched between them. For a moment she saw something flicker in his expression, something that made her stomach clench. It wasn't just suspicion, it was judgment. A feeling crept over her, one she had known all too well. She was being seen not as a traveler, not as a professional, but as a threat. And in that moment, Naomi realized, this wasn't about safety. It never had been. "You can check them if you like," Naomi said, her voice calm but firm. "Though I imagine you'll need specialized equipment." She watched as Officer Grayson lowered the USB sticks into his palm, turning them over as if expecting to find something incriminating written on their surface. Then, something shifted in his expression. It was subtle, an almost imperceptible flicker of darkness that made Naomi's stomach clench. It wasn't just suspicion, it was something deeper, something uglier. The kind of look that made it clear he had already decided she was guilty of what he hadn't quite figured out yet. Behind them, a line of restless travelers had started to form. A middle-aged woman in a colorful scarf watched with cautious curiosity. A couple in matching tracksuits whispered between themselves. A group of college students, barely awake for their early morning flight, glanced over with mild interest. Nearby, the young TSA employee hovered uncertainly, clearly hoping Grayson would just wave Naomi through and let the line move again. But he didn't. Instead, his tone sharpened. "Open your purse too." Naomi felt her chest tighten. Her small crossbody bag was already sitting on the side table, untouched, having gone through the security scanner like everything else. She picked it up, flipping open the magnetic clasp. "I already ran this through the scanner. Is there a reason?" "You heard me," Grayson interrupted, his voice taut with impatience. Something about him had changed, as if adrenaline was fueling a deep-seated hostility. Naomi's face burned. She was on the brink of pointing out that she had done nothing suspicious, that he had no cause to be rummaging through her personal belongings like this. But she also knew how quickly these encounters could spiral out of control. Just as she debated whether to push back, a new presence approached from behind. A woman's voice cut through the tension. "Everything okay here, Grayson?" Naomi turned slightly. Another uniformed officer stood nearby, a Latina woman in her late 20s, her badge reading Officer Vega. Her expression was cautious, uncertain. Grayson barely spared her a glance. "Fine," he snapped. But Vega didn't walk away. She had seen something that didn't sit right with her. Naomi could sense it. Vega's gaze flitted between Naomi's tense posture and Grayson's rigid stance, taking in the heavy silence weighing over the checkpoint. Then, in one swift motion, Grayson plunged his hands into Naomi's purse. Her stomach twisted as he dug through her wallet, her lip gloss, a pack of gum, a handful of receipts, her phone charger. Nothing. He came up empty-handed, and yet Naomi could see it in his eyes. He still wasn't satisfied. Finally, he exhaled sharply, stepping back as though disgusted that he had found nothing. "All right," he muttered. "You can go." His tone was dismissive, the same way someone might shoo away a stray cat. Naomi swallowed her fury. She quickly gathered her belongings, stuffing them back into her carry-on, determined not to let her anger boil over. As she zipped up her bag, she heard him mutter under his breath, "Next time, keep your stuff in better order." Vega's face twitched, somewhere between pity and quiet disapproval. But she didn't challenge him. She didn't say what Naomi could tell she was thinking. Naomi slung her purse over her shoulder and gripped the handle of her carry-on, pulling it away from the table. Even as she walked toward the escalators leading to the gates, she could feel the weight of lingering stares. Some eyes held sympathy. Others held leftover curiosity. But no one said anything. The entire scene had left an awful taste in her mouth. She tried to shake it off, whispering a quiet, "Thank you" to Vega before hurrying away. She needed to breathe. She needed to escape that awful checkpoint, but deep down she knew this wasn't over yet. Naomi found a quiet seat near a large glass window overlooking the planes lined up on the tarmac. The soft glow of the morning sun painted the sky in delicate hues of pink and blue. But her mind was clouded. The aftershock of what had just happened lingered like a bitter shadow. She pulled out her phone, hands trembling slightly as she typed out a message to a friend about the bizarre encounter. Before she could hit send, a soft voice startled her. "Excuse me, ma'am." Naomi looked up sharply. It was Officer Vega. Her pulse kicked up. Was this trouble following her? But Vega wasn't hostile. Instead, her expression was cautious, apologetic. She hesitated for a moment, then sat in the seat across from Naomi, keeping a respectful distance. "I wanted to let you know that I saw what happened back there," she said, her voice low. Naomi studied her carefully. "And?" Vega sighed. "Grayson is old school, and we've had a few complaints about him, if I'm honest, but unless it turns into a scandal, things like this rarely go anywhere." Naomi exhaled sharply, leaning back in her chair. She had felt it in her bones, the deep unfairness of it all. "I just want you to know," Vega continued, "that it wasn't your fault." Naomi's jaw tightened. "Thanks for saying that," she murmured, even if the words didn't erase the sting. Naomi gave Officer Vega a small, grateful nod. She wasn't sure whether Vega had risked much by warning her, but the sincerity in her voice made Naomi believe she wasn't just another silent bystander. "I appreciate you speaking up," Naomi said, though her voice was edged with exhaustion. Vega hesitated, biting her lip as if weighing whether to say something else. Then in a hushed tone she added, "I also heard him on the radio after you left." Naomi tensed. "What did he say?" Vega's expression darkened. He was ranting about needing to keep an eye on certain types. A cold chill ran down Naomi's spine. Certain types. She knew exactly what that meant. Vega sighed. "I wanted to warn you, if you have a connecting flight or if you see him again, be careful." Naomi inhaled slowly, steadying herself. "You think he's going to hassle me again?" Vega shrugged helplessly. "I don't know. He's unpredictable. When he feels threatened or if his ego is bruised, he doubles down. And this morning, he's in a mood." She paused, studying Naomi's face. "The last thing I want is to scare you, but my gut says he might not let this go." Frustration surged in Naomi's chest. This was supposed to be a simple trip, a routine flight. And yet here she was, dealing with an officer who had decided, for whatever reason, that she was a problem. She exhaled, forcing herself to remain calm. "Thank you for telling me," she said quietly. "I didn't catch your first name." Vega offered a slight smile. "Lucia." She adjusted her bulletproof vest. "Good luck with your flight, Miss Carter." With that, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the steady flow of passengers. Naomi watched her go, Vega's warning settling in her chest like a weight she couldn't shake. She glanced around the terminal, scanning for any sign of Officer Grayson. Nothing. For now. She checked her watch. All she had to do was board her plane and leave this mess behind. Or so she hoped. To calm her nerves, Naomi decided to grab a coffee before heading to her gate. She joined the short line at a cafe near Gate 26, inhaling the rich aroma of freshly brewed espresso. As she waited, she mentally rehearsed her speech, reciting lines about systemic barriers and the power of individual action. Ironically, her own words about discrimination and the weight of suspicion now felt painfully personal. Her phone vibrated. A message from Danny, her close friend, lit up the screen. "Hey, safe travels. Let me know if you need a ride from San. You got this, star." Naomi's lips curled into a faint smile. She typed back a quick thanks, deciding not to mention the nightmare she had just endured. No point in worrying Danny over something that was hopefully over. "Next in line," called the barista. Naomi stepped forward, placing an order for a caramel latte. She tapped her foot, trying to shake off her nerves. The overhead screen still showed her flight on time. Soon she'd be on her way to San Diego, ready to deliver a speech she had poured weeks of work into. Her drink arrived, and just as she reached for it, a presence shifted behind her. She turned instinctively, and her stomach dropped. Standing at a distance, scanning the cafe area, his cold, predatory eyes flickered across the crowd, his gaze moving from traveler to traveler like a lion surveying a herd. Naomi's pulse pounded in her ears. Had he followed her? Or was this just routine patrol? She had no way of knowing, but she wasn't about to wait around to find out. She grabbed her latte and slipped into the flow of foot traffic, moving swiftly but carefully. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She didn't look back, didn't slow down. Only when she reached her assigned gate 31 did she finally exhale. The waiting area was quieter than the rest of the terminal. A few passengers sat scattered across the rows of chairs. A man beside her was engrossed in a newspaper, oblivious to Naomi's racing thoughts. She sank into the seat, gripping her cup, forcing herself to focus on the positive. In less than an hour, she'd be on board. She could lose herself in a book or nap, leaving Grayson and his hostility behind. At least, that's what she thought. What she didn't realize was that somewhere in the terminal, trouble was already brewing. Naomi was about to lose herself in social media scrolling when the overhead speaker crackled to life. Paging passenger Naomi Carter, please approach the desk at gate 31. A jolt of dread ran through her. She froze, her fingers clenched around her phone. No. She glanced toward the gate agent desk and noticed the staff member watching her expectantly. A polite smile, but slightly tense. Slowly, she stood, her heart hammering against her ribs as she walked forward. "Hi," she said cautiously. "I'm Naomi Carter. Is there an issue?" The agent, his name tag reading Ryan, gave her an apologetic look. "Hey there, Miss Carter. We just received a note from airport security. They need to verify your seat assignment and ask a few questions before we begin boarding." Naomi's blood ran cold. Security. She knew exactly who that meant. Naomi stared at Ryan, the gate agent, her stomach knotting. "Security wants to talk to me again?" she asked, confusion tightening her voice. "I've already gone through screening." Ryan sighed, clearly uncomfortable. "I know, I'm just relaying the message." He glanced at his screen and gestured toward it. "They ask that you wait here until an officer arrives. We won't start boarding for another 20 minutes. Naomi's pulse quickened. "Do you know which officer?" she asked, though deep down she already knew the answer. Ryan hesitated, lowering his voice. "I'm not sure, but I suspect it's the same one from earlier." Grayson. Naomi clenched her jaw, Vega's warning echoing in her head. This wasn't over. He wasn't done with her. She inhaled slowly, trying to steady her voice. "Okay, thanks." Ryan gave her a sympathetic look, then turned his attention to scanning other passengers' boarding passes. Naomi walked back to her seat, gripping her coffee cup. Her hands trembled slightly. She considered ignoring the request, pretending she hadn't heard the page. But she knew that would only escalate things. If Grayson truly had it out for her, running would just make her look guilty in his eyes. She forced herself to breathe. Count to 10. Stay calm. Around her, the airport hummed with normalcy. Families rummaged for passports, business travelers balanced coffee cups and laptops, and announcements droned overhead about flight statuses. She wished desperately that she could just blend into the crowd, but she couldn't. And as she checked the time, the sinking feeling in her stomach worsened. 15 minutes passed. Then she saw him. Grayson, striding down the concourse like a man on a mission. Naomi's breath hitched. He wasn't alone. Flanking him was another officer, a bald, middle-aged man with a calm demeanor. This wasn't a random security check anymore. This was something else. The boarding line at gate 31 had begun to form. A voice overhead announced, "Now boarding pre-boarding passengers needing extra assistance." Naomi stood near the gate agent desk, refusing to back down. If this was happening, she would face it head-on. Her heartbeat thrummed like a drum roll as Grayson approached. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice gruff. Their eyes locked. "I need to inspect your personal items again." Naomi exhaled slowly, forcing control over the creeping anger in her chest. "I've already been searched." Her voice was steady. "TSA cleared me. You personally searched my carry-on." Grayson's nostrils flared. Now we have reason to believe you're carrying items that require further investigation." "What items?" Naomi's patience cracked slightly. "I have nothing illegal or suspicious." Her eyes flickered to the second officer, hoping for some sign of reason. The bald officer spoke up, his voice gentler. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Hayes. We were informed there might be a concern." "Concern?" Naomi retorted, her frustration spiking. "This is getting ridiculous." Ryan, the gate agent, shot her a look of quiet sympathy, but his hands were tied. He had a job to do. Grayson ignored her protest and hoisted her carry-on off the floor, placing it on a nearby bench. "Open it," he demanded. Passengers around them paused, their eyes flicking between Naomi and the officers. Her cheeks burned. She had no choice but to comply. She unfastened the zipper, revealing the same clothes, notes, and laptop Grayson had already seen. But this time, he wasn't just looking, he was hunting. He shoved aside a pair of folded pants, his movements sharper, more impatient. Naomi could see it. He was searching for something specific. "But what?" Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke. "You said there might be items requiring investigation." She met his steely gaze. "Mind telling me exactly what you're looking for?" Grayson's top lip curled slightly. "We received a tip," he said. "You're carrying restricted chemicals, possibly disguised in toiletry containers." Naomi's heart slammed against her ribs. Chemicals? Her mind reeled. That wasn't just an inconvenience or an overzealous security check. That was a serious allegation. That was something that could get her detained, or worse. Her throat felt dry. That's absurd. The accusation had escalated so drastically that for a second, she wondered if she had misheard. Officer Hayes, the second officer, held up a hand. "Let's all stay calm." His voice was even. "Miss Carter, do you mind opening your toiletry bag again?" Naomi swallowed down her outrage, forcing herself to cooperate. With measured movements, she unzipped the pouch, revealing travel-sized shampoo, conditioner, lotion, and contact lens solution. Everything was normal. She looked up, watching as Grayson's expression darkened. He hadn't found what he was looking for. But Naomi had a sinking feeling he wouldn't stop until he did. Officer Hayes scanned the bottles in Naomi's toiletry bag, his fingers briefly flipping each label. Shampoo, conditioner, lotion, contact lens solution. Nothing illegal. Nothing suspicious. Meanwhile, Officer Grayson rummaged deeper into her bag, his movements more aggressive, as though sheer force of will might make contraband appear. But there was nothing. Not a single banned item. Not a single threat. Still, instead of relief, Naomi watched Grayson's expression twist with frustration. Then, instead of stopping, he jabbed a finger at her. "I'm not done. Show me your purse." Naomi clenched her jaw so tightly it hurt. Each passing moment frayed her composure. The flight would start boarding any minute, and yet here she stood, singled out and humiliated again. With hands trembling in anger, she fumbled for her purse, an awful sense of déjà vu settling in her stomach. This wasn't a search anymore. This was a personal vendetta. She opened the flap, keeping her movements controlled, refusing to let him see how much this was breaking her. Grayson immediately shoved his hand inside, rifling through the same wallet, phone charger, and small essentials he had already inspected earlier. Nearby, Officer Hayes took a slight step back, his discomfort evident. Naomi didn't miss it. She saw how he exchanged a glance with Ryan, the gate agent, who stood stiffly behind the counter, his brow furrowed in empathy. Then, suddenly, Grayson's expression flickered with surprise. His hand emerged from her purse, gripping a small, amber-tinted plastic container. Naomi recognized it instantly. Her late father's old pill bottle, a keepsake. Something she used to carry a few vitamins and aspirin. Something she had nearly forgotten was in there. Grayson held up the bottle, shaking it slightly, his eyes sharp with accusation. "What's this?" he hissed. Naomi's breath hitched. "It's..." Before she could finish, the bottle slipped from his grip. A sharp clatter echoed against the tile floor. The cap popped off. And just like that, the contents scattered across the polished surface. Vitamin C tablets, a couple of aspirin, a single large fish oil capsule. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, red-faced with anger, Grayson stooped down to pick them up, and when he stood, his fury was unmistakable. "What are these?" he demanded. Naomi's cheeks flamed with embarrassment. Her voice came out tight, clipped. "They're vitamin supplements. Look at them. They're over the counter." Grayson snatched one of the tablets, glaring at it as though he could will it into being something illegal. A few nearby passengers craned their necks, their curiosity piqued by the commotion. Naomi felt the seconds ticking away, each one bringing her closer to missing her flight. Officer Hayes cleared his throat, stepping forward. "Sir," he said carefully, "they appear to be vitamins," as she said. But Grayson wasn't letting this go. His eyes flickered down to the faded label on the bottle, the name partially worn off by time. He zeroed in on it immediately. "Whose name is this?" he demanded. Naomi exhaled sharply, a strange sadness pressing at her ribs. "My dad's," she said, her voice quieter now. "He passed away. I just used the bottle. It's a keepsake." For a fraction of a second, Naomi swore she saw something flicker in Grayson's eyes, something almost like comprehension. But just as quickly, it was gone. He straightened, his expression hardening. "This could be prescription medication that doesn't belong to you." Naomi felt her throat tighten. "No, it's just vitamins. You can test them if you want." Her voice wavered with exhaustion and frustration. She was done with this, done with being treated like a criminal. For a long, agonizing moment, Grayson said nothing. Then, in a sharp burst of anger, he hurled the pills back into the bottle, slamming it down onto the bench. His chest heaved as he muttered, "Pack your things." Naomi snatched her purse, hands shaking as she reassembled the scattered items. But even as she did, she could feel his eyes on her. She could hear the unspoken promise in his glare. He wasn't done yet. Ryan, the gate agent, initiated the main boarding process just moments after Grayson stepped away. Naomi exhaled a shuddering breath. Finally, her legs felt unsteady as she rolled her battered carry-on toward the gate. Her breath fluttered as she tried to calm herself, but storm winds swirled beneath her tranquil facade, a mix of anger, fear, and righteous indignation. As she handed her boarding pass to Ryan, he scanned it, his eyes flicking up sympathetically. In a low whisper, he said, "I'm sorry about that. Hope you have a good flight." Naomi managed a fragile smile. "Thanks." Then, she stepped onto the jet bridge, the hum of the aircraft's engines thrumming in the background. She clutched her purse tightly against her body. She had made it. She was finally on her way. But somehow she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the last she'd hear from Officer Grayson. Naomi carefully tucked her carry-on into the overhead bin, ensuring that her rummaged belongings were secured. Finally, she slumped into her seat, her heart still hammering. She had made it. Despite everything, the humiliation, the accusations, the sheer hostility, she was finally on the plane, presumably safe from Officer Grayson's harassment. She exhaled deeply, hoping this was the last she'd see of him. But her reprieve was short-lived. A crackling announcement spilled through the cabin. "Good morning, folks. This is Captain Reeves speaking. We've just received notice of an unexpected delay. We'll remain at the gate as we handle a minor mechanical check. Estimated departure in about 30 minutes." A chorus of groans rippled through the cabin. Naomi's stomach dropped. The longer the plane stayed grounded, the higher the chance that Grayson might find a way to interfere again. She tried to dismiss the paranoid thought. He had no real grounds to board the plane. Not now. Not after she had cleared security. Twice. And yet, after everything that had happened, she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling creeping over her skin. Passengers around her settled in for the delay. Some rummaged for phone chargers, others stretched out, resigned to the wait. A baby wailed 2 rows behind her. Overhead compartments clicked shut as flight attendants finished their final checks. Naomi closed her eyes, willing the plane to push off the gate. She tried to refocus on her upcoming speech, her slides, the discussion panel, the connections she hoped to forge at the conference. This was a big moment for her. She refused to let Grayson overshadow it. She glanced at her watch. If they took off in 30 minutes, she'd still arrive in time to check into her hotel and prepare. Minutes ticked by. The mechanical check dragged on. Flight attendants moved through the aisles, offering cups of water to keep passengers patient. Naomi accepted one, taking a small sip, determined to stay composed. Little did she know, the next wave of trouble was already lurking just beyond the jet bridge, waiting for the slightest opportunity to strike again. 15 minutes passed, then 20. The plane remained stalled at the gate. The captain occasionally updated passengers, reassuring them the issue was minor. Naomi shifted uncomfortably in her seat, checking emails on her phone. Up ahead, the cabin door remained slightly ajar, left open for further instructions. Then, a startled noise came from the front of the plane. Naomi looked up, her pulse seizing. Two uniformed figures stepped onto the aircraft. Officer Grayson and Officer Hayes. A hush fell over the cabin. Passengers exchanged uneasy glances as whispers spread. A flight attendant quickly approached the officers, her voice polite but tense. "Can I help you, officers?" Grayson's voice boomed over the hushed plane. "We need to speak with a passenger. Miss Naomi Carter, she's in seat 13A. Naomi's stomach twisted. What now? All around her, heads turned. Naomi felt her face grow hot. She wanted to disappear into her seat, to melt into thin air. Vega's warning echoed in her mind. Grayson doubles down when he feels threatened. This was a prime example. The lead flight attendant, trying to keep her composure, asked, "Officer, do you have a warrant or an immediate cause? We're about to depart as soon as the mechanical check is cleared." Grayson brandished a folded piece of paper, likely some form of official directive. "Airport security has the right to remove or question any passenger before takeoff," he barked. Then his gaze locked onto Naomi. "Now, Miss Carter," he said, scanning the row. "Please step forward." Naomi's mouth went dry. This was beyond personal now. This was public humiliation. She could feel passengers staring, some confused, some outraged on her behalf. She could hear whispers. Why are they targeting her? This is insane. Poor woman. She unbuckled her seatbelt, standing slowly. Officer Hayes spoke in a calmer tone. "Miss Carter, we need you to step off the plane for a few minutes. There are clarifications regarding your items." Naomi suppressed the urge to scream. She realized that if she refused, it could escalate into something even worse. She could be forcibly removed. She could miss her flight entirely. With a trembling hand, she reached for her purse. "Do I need to bring my carry-on?" she asked, her voice taut. Grayson nodded sharply. "Everything. Let's go." The flight attendants exchanged worried glances, but ultimately they stepped aside. Naomi forced herself to keep her head high as she navigated the narrow aisle. She heard murmured exclamations from passengers. She ignored them. She refused to meet their gazes, whether sympathetic or confused. Instead, her mind clung to a single phrase: immediate karma. Would it come? Would this relentless pursuit backfire on Grayson? Or was she about to step into something far worse? Naomi stepped onto the jet bridge, clutching her unfastened bag. Grayson led the way, his posture rigid, his authority unquestioned. Officer Hayes followed closely behind, his expression uneasy. As the aircraft door shut behind her, muffling the confusion of the passengers inside, Naomi felt a wave of helplessness crash over her. She was alone with them now, and she had no idea what was about to happen next. Grayson led her down a narrow hallway, past the bustling gate area, into a small annex near the boarding zone, a storage space for wheelchairs and extra supplies. The air felt thick and claustrophobic. Grayson pointed at a metal table. "Put your bag there." Naomi hesitated for half a second, then did as instructed, her anger simmering beneath the surface. This was beyond absurd. "Officer, what is going on?" she demanded, her voice shaking with indignation. "I've been searched already, repeatedly. There's nothing suspicious." Grayson's face glowed with smug authority. "We received new information about potential contraband." Naomi stiffened. "From whom?" Her voice grew sharper. "And what contraband?" He ignored her completely, diving into her clothes, toiletry bag, and laptop case again. Officer Hayes stood back, his discomfort growing. Naomi caught a glimpse of pity in his eyes, but he didn't speak up. Then, a commotion echoed from the hallway, a familiar voice, sharp, breathless, and demanding. "Grayson." Naomi's head snapped toward the entrance as Officer Vega appeared, her face flushed from rushing. "What the hell are you doing?" she barked. Grayson barely looked at her. "I'm within my rights, Vega. Step back." Naomi watched as Vega approached, her gaze sweeping over the scattered contents of her bag. Her expression hardened. "This is overkill," Vega muttered. "We have no credible threat or evidence to detain Miss Carter." Grayson's face reddened with anger. "I do what's necessary. We got an anonymous tip. That's all the grounds I need." Naomi felt her breath catch. Anonymous tip. The perfect excuse to harass someone without accountability. Her hands curled into fists. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice laced with frustration. "You're making things up as you go." Vega looked like she wanted to agree with her, but before she could say anything, Grayson's hand plunged beneath Naomi's folder, and when it reappeared, he was holding a small, sealed bag. Inside was a dark, powder-like substance. Naomi's heart stopped. Her breath came out in short, shallow gasps as she stared at the bag in disbelief. That was not there before. She knew it wasn't. Her entire body turned cold as the reality of the situation hit her. She was being framed. Vega's eyes widened in shock. What? Grayson's pupils glinted with triumph as he held up the suspicious pouch. He turned to Officer Hayes, his voice dripping with fake authority. Looks like we just confirmed our tip. Then, in an even louder voice, this flight is grounded until we get the suspect detained. Naomi felt herself go numb. The sheer unfairness, the terrifying weight of the accusation, crashed down on her. This wasn't just an inconvenience anymore. This was her life. "That's not mine," she cried, her voice cracking. Her hands shook as she pointed at Grayson. "You planted that. You know you did." A sick smile played at the edges of Grayson's lips. "Right," he said mockingly, "because I have nothing better to do than frame innocent travelers." Naomi felt tears threaten her vision, not from guilt but from sheer rage. Vega spluttered in disbelief. "Grayson? That's insane. She clearly didn't." "Enough," he snapped, cutting her off. Then, lifting his radio, he barked into the receiver. "Requesting backup. We have a detained passenger in possession of a suspicious substance." Naomi's body shook. She was being set up by a man with a badge and unchecked authority. And if she didn't do something fast, she was going to be hauled off as a criminal. Hayes looked at the suspicious bag, then at Naomi's horrified expression. For the first time, he hesitated. "Sir." Grayson shot him a silencing glare. Vega was shaking her head, at a loss for how to stop this nightmare unfolding before her. Then, a commanding voice cut through the tension. "Everything all right here?" All eyes turned. A uniformed supervisor strode into the room. A tall, imposing figure with a name tag that read, Lieutenant Hoffman. His presence alone commanded immediate respect. Naomi sucked in a breath. He had heard part of the confrontation. Grayson immediately straightened, his demeanor shifting into forced professionalism. "Lieutenant," he greeted stiffly, "I'm placing this woman under investigation for possession of a suspicious substance. We have reason to believe." Lieutenant Hoffman raised a hand, cutting him off. "At ease, Grayson. Let's see what we have first." Then he turned to Naomi, his expression unreadable. "Ma'am," he said, his voice measured, "are you aware of the contents of this bag?" Naomi drew a shaky breath, forcing herself to stand tall. "I've never seen that before, sir. It's not mine." Her fate now rested in whatever happened next. And in that moment, she could only hope that immediate karma would strike fast. Naomi stood frozen, her mind racing. Everything inside her screamed this was a setup. Grayson's cheeks blazed with triumph as he held up the suspicious bag. "She's lying," he barked. "We got a tip. She's been defiant all morning." Lieutenant Hoffman narrowed his eyes, holding up the bag at eye level, inspecting the blackish powder inside. His frown deepened. "Grayson, call for a field test kit," he ordered. "If this is an illicit substance, we'll know soon enough." Naomi's heart pounded. This was it. This was her last chance to prove her innocence before things spiraled completely out of control. She prayed the test would reveal the truth. She needed a miracle. And then, from the corner of the gate area, someone stepped forward. Someone carrying the evidence that could bring Grayson's entire plan crashing down. A tense silence filled the room as Ryan, the gate agent, stepped into the cramped annex. His face was pale but resolute. In his hand, he held his phone. "Lieutenant Hoffman," he said, his voice wavering slightly. "I think you all need to see this." Hoffman's brow furrowed. "Who are you?" Ryan swallowed hard. "I'm the gate agent for Flight 2289 to San Diego." I had to say something. He extended the phone to Hoffman, who took it with a measured expression. Naomi's pulse roared in her ears as she watched Hoffman tap the screen. His eyebrows lifted. "Is this security footage?" he asked quietly. Ryan nodded. "I asked ground staff to replay the feed from the moment Miss Carter boarded," he explained, his voice steadier now. "I was worried about how intensely Officer Grayson targeted her. This is from a camera that faces the gate area, and that table right there." Naomi felt the energy shift. The color drained from Grayson's face. "What cameras are pointed at the gate?" he snapped, his voice edged with panic. But Hoffman was already focused on the screen, his expression turning to stone. He tilted the phone, turning it for the group to see. A grainy but clear replay played across the screen. There was Officer Grayson. leaning over Naomi's open carry-on, rummaging through her belongings. At one point, his hand dipped into his own pocket. Then, a second later, the suspicious pouch appeared inside Naomi's bag. Naomi's hand flew to her mouth. Relief and pure fury crashed over her in waves. She had seen it with her own eyes. Grayson had planted the evidence. The room went silent. Hayes stared at the footage in horror. Vega let out a quiet curse under her breath. And Grayson looked like a man watching his entire world collapse in front of him, his face twisted with panic. "That footage is distorted," he snapped. "It's not. You can't." Lieutenant Hoffman's voice sliced through his protest. "I've seen enough." He turned slowly to Grayson. His voice was calm, firm. "Grayson, you're relieved of duty, pending investigation." For a moment, Grayson just stood there, blinking. Then, the dam broke. Grayson's bravado crumbled in an instant. His eyes bulged, his face turning red with rage and fear. "You can't do this," he shouted, his voice cracking. His breath came out in quick, panicked gasps. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. "That woman is... I was just..." Hoffman didn't waver. "Hayes," he said smoothly, "assist me. We're escorting Officer Grayson to HQ for an internal review." Vega stepped forward, blocking the exit. "Miss Carter is free to continue her journey." Grayson's chest rose and fell in frantic bursts. Then, he let out a guttural yell, a sound somewhere between rage and pure desperation. A man realizing he had lost everything. His voice echoed through the annex, bouncing off the walls. Naomi stood still, barely breathing, watching it all unfold. Immediate karma had arrived, and it had arrived fast. As Officer Hayes and Lieutenant Hoffman led Grayson away, his protests faded into the corridor. The room remained still. Naomi felt her body finally relax, though exhaustion settled in her bones. She had been so close to disaster, so close to having her life derailed by a corrupt officer's personal vendetta. She turned, locking eyes with Vega, who exhaled heavily, her shoulders sagging in relief. The female officer gave Naomi a look that seemed to say, "I'm sorry it got this far." Ryan, the gate agent, still held his phone, his face lined with the weight of what had just happened. Naomi managed to whisper, "Thank you." His throat bobbed as he swallowed. I knew something wasn't right." Naomi nodded, gripping her purse tightly. She had no idea what would happen next. But for now, she was free. Naomi stood frozen in place, her breath still unsteady. It was over. Officer Hayes mumbled a quiet apology, then followed Lieutenant Hoffman to complete the paperwork on Grayson's arrest. The weight of the morning still pressed against Naomi's chest, but for the first time it wasn't fear or frustration. It was vindication. Ryan, the gate agent, gingerly took back his phone, his expression filled with an odd mix of relief and regret. He met Naomi's gaze. "I'm so sorry you went through this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I had this gut feeling. It felt so wrong." Naomi nodded, words caught in her throat. Finally, she managed to whisper, "You saved my life." "Thank you." Ryan blinked rapidly, as if overwhelmed by the weight of those words. Nearby, Vega cleared her throat, stepping closer. "Miss Carter, let me walk you back to your plane," she offered. "It's the least I can do after all this." Naomi hesitated for only a second before nodding. She thought about how Vega had tried to warn her earlier, how she had seen Grayson's corruption for what it was, but had been powerless to stop it at first. Naomi offered a trembling smile, still reeling from everything. "Yes, please. I just want to get on that flight." Together they navigated back into the gate area. A wave of murmurs swept through the crowd as Naomi stepped into the boarding area. Passengers who had been waiting at the gate still looked anxious, many of them curious about what had happened. But the moment they recognized Naomi, something shifted. She could see it in their eyes, the realization that she had been cleared of wrongdoing. The flight attendants at the door parted to let her pass, their expressions tinged with quiet relief. Just as she was about to step onto the jet bridge, Naomi turned to Vega, her throat tight with emotion. "Thank you for having my back." Vega looked down for a moment, a conflicted mix of pride and sadness flickering in her expression. "I wish I'd done more sooner," she admitted. "But at least the truth's out." Naomi nodded, stepping onto the plane. As she made her way down the aisle, Naomi felt dozens of eyes on her. Some passengers offered subtle nods. Others gave reassuring smiles. One older woman, sitting by the aisle, patted Naomi's arm gently as she passed. A few people even offered soft-spoken words of support. Naomi slid into seat 13A with a shuddering sigh, resting her head against the window. She had made it. There was no telling how Grayson's actions would be handled in the coming days, but for now, she was free. Minutes later, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Folks, we've finally been cleared for departure. Thanks for your patience." A ripple of relieved chatter spread through the cabin. The cabin door shut, sealing them in. The plane backed away from the gate, slowly taxiing toward the runway. Naomi pressed her forehead against the cool window, feeling a surge of emotion. Relief, exhaustion, gratitude. Immediate karma had arrived. And now she vowed to take every lesson from this morning and channel it into her upcoming symposium speech, to shine an even brighter light on systemic abuses of power, to remind people that even the smallest act of courage can tip the scales of justice. The flight from JFK to San Diego was calm, a stark contrast to the chaos that had unfolded earlier. Naomi slept for part of the journey, her body desperately needing the rest. For the other half, she reviewed her presentation slides, her mind sharper than ever. Occasionally, a pang of recollection about Grayson's cruelty and cunning would sting her. But the truth had prevailed, and he had lost. By the time the plane touched down at San Diego International Airport, Naomi felt a renewed sense of purpose. The bright, cloudless sky and swaying palm trees outside the window were a stark contrast to the tense gloom that had loomed over her at JFK. She had escaped the storm, and now she was ready to step into the sun. At baggage claim, Naomi watched as the carousel churned out suitcases. She only had one checked bag, aside from her carry-on, which now held the remnants of her morning ordeal. As she waited, her phone buzzed in her hand. A call from an unknown number. For a moment, she considered letting it go to voicemail, but something nudged her to answer. "Hello?" She braced for an airline representative, or maybe even airport security calling for some final follow-up. Instead, a calm, firm female voice greeted her. "Miss Carter, this is Lieutenant Hoffman." Naomi straightened, pulse quickening. "I wanted to let you know that we're proceeding with an internal affairs investigation into Officer Grayson," Hoffman said smoothly. "We may ask for a formal statement from you, but first, I owe you an apology. This never should have happened." Naomi's stomach flipped. Her voice came out quieter than she expected. "Thank you, Lieutenant. I'll cooperate however I can." Hoffman's tone remained measured. "I appreciate that, and I commend you for keeping calm under severe provocation. Grayson has been taken into custody for questioning. If you need support or legal counsel, our office will provide resources." Naomi swallowed hard, emotion swirling inside her. "I'll keep that in mind. Thank you." She ended the call, exhaling slowly. It was truly over. Grayson's actions would not be ignored, but the reality of how close she had come to being falsely accused still lingered. What if Ryan hadn't recognized the injustice? What if Vega hadn't spoken up? She spotted her luggage on the carousel, grabbed it, and headed toward the exit. The moment she stepped outside, a warm wave of California air greeted her. And there, standing by the curb, waving excitedly, was Danny. Naomi felt tears well up in her eyes, not just from relief, but from the sheer magnitude of everything she had endured in the past few hours. She rushed toward her friend, arms opening wide. She was safe, and more than that, she was ready to tell the world her story. The moment Naomi spotted Danny, she rushed forward, throwing her arms around her friend in a tight embrace. "Hey, Star," Danny teased, pulling back with a grin. "You ready for your big moment at UCSD?" Naomi let out a shaky laugh, the weight of the morning still lingering in her chest. But despite it all, she managed to say, "After the morning I had, I'm ready for anything." Little did she know her experiences, both harrowing and uplifting, would shape her keynote speech in ways she never expected. Because sometimes, the darkest trials can lead to the most powerful transformations. 2 days later, Naomi stood at the podium. The lecture hall at UC San Diego was packed. Rows upon rows of students, faculty, and community leaders filled the seats. The symposium focused on social justice, community engagement, and transformative leadership. Naomi had been given the honor of delivering the keynote address. She had spent days debating whether to include her airport ordeal in her speech. The experience was still raw, a wound that hadn't fully healed. But the more she reflected, the more she realized it was relevant, it was necessary. Her experience was a first-hand example of power imbalance, systemic bias, and the bystander who becomes an ally. So when she stepped up to the microphone, she decided to tell the truth. "And that," she said, her voice carrying across the silent auditorium, "is why I nearly missed my flight." A wave of empathetic laughter rippled through the room. Then her tone shifted. "But in all honesty," she continued, "this experience exposed something much deeper. How a single individual with a badge can weaponize their authority, how prejudice and intimidation can take over, and yet it also revealed something else. That even one bystander, a gate agent, a fellow officer, a stranger, can tip the scales toward justice. Most importantly, it taught me that any one of us can be the someone that another person desperately needs." The audience listened in rapt silence. Some people leaned forward in their seats, their faces tense with emotion. A few had tears glistening in their eyes. Naomi's own voice trembled as she recounted the moment she almost got framed. "Without that security footage," she confessed, "I might be facing charges right now." She took a steadying breath. "I owe my freedom to people who stepped up, who believed in fairness enough to do something about it." She let the silence settle. Then she concluded, "Our world cannot afford for people to remain silent or indifferent. Whether you're a police officer challenging corruption, a teacher challenging discrimination, or a gate agent checking security footage, small acts can alter destinies." For a moment, there was only silence. Then, thunderous applause erupted across the room. Students rose to their feet, clapping vigorously. Faculty members nodded in approval, some dabbing at their eyes. Naomi blinked back tears, overwhelmed by the response. She had taken her trauma and transformed it into a call to action, and people heard her. After the speech, dozens of people lined up to shake her hand. Some shared their own experiences. Professors offered support. A group of students excitedly told her that her speech inspired them to campaign for policy changes on campus. Naomi could feel it happening in real time. Her story was already making an impact. That evening, as she strolled under the palm trees and city lights, she felt more certain than ever. This was her calling, to educate, to motivate, to ensure that stories of injustice never get swept away or forgotten. Over the next few days, Naomi's speech gained unexpected traction. A local reporter who had attended the symposium published an article titled, "Speaker Survives Airport Ordeal to Inspire Change." The piece covered the alleged frame-up attempt, the courage of bystanders who intervened, the timely arrival of Lieutenant Hoffman. Within a week, national outlets picked up the story. She started receiving interview requests from podcasters, YouTubers, and journalists who focused on discrimination in airport security, abuse of power by law enforcement, the role of technology in protecting civil rights. At first, Naomi hesitated. Reliving the ordeal wasn't easy, but then she thought about how many others had been through similar harassment and didn't have proof to fight back. If sharing her story could help even one person, it was worth it, so she agreed. Meanwhile, Vega reached out via text. The internal investigation into Officer Grayson was moving quickly. Her message read, "Grayson is officially suspended without pay. Internal Affairs is pushing for formal charges. Evidence tampering and misconduct. Hayes testified against him. Ryan's security footage was a key piece of evidence." Naomi felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. The system wasn't perfect. Immediate karma didn't always come so quickly, but sometimes justice could prevail. If people cared enough to fight for it, Naomi's life had changed overnight. Requests to speak at universities and conferences multiplied. Her schedule overflowed with commitments, all tied to activism and social reform. The irony wasn't lost on her. The very oppression meant to silence her had propelled her voice to new heights. Yet, even as her public profile soared, Naomi remained grounded. In quiet moments, she found herself revisiting Grayson's sneer, his brazen attempt to sabotage her future. The way he had looked at her, convinced that he could destroy her with a lie. Sometimes Naomi woke in the middle of the night, her mind replaying the near miss. Therapy sessions helped. She was determined to ensure that her trauma fueled her resolve, not corroded her spirit. She also kept in touch with Lieutenant Hoffman, who had expressed interest in enacting broader reforms within the airport police. Progress, of course, would be slow, but he vowed to weed out any officers who mirrored Grayson's mindset. Meanwhile, Vega, emboldened by the scandal, had begun pushing for mandatory bias training in airport security. Naomi welcomed these small but significant steps. The storm that had nearly swallowed her whole was now clearing. In its place, a sense of clarity. Her voice mattered, and she was committed to using it every chance she got. Weeks later, Naomi returned to her apartment in Brooklyn. The familiar hum of city traffic welcomed her home, along with the soft glow of streetlights filtering through her curtains. The moment she stepped inside, her cat, Mochi, let out an indignant meow from the windowsill. Naomi laughed, scooping up the fluffy ball of attitude. "Missed me?" she murmured. Though she was drained from back-to-back speaking engagements, there was a deep sense of accomplishment settling in her bones. She dropped her suitcases in the hallway, resolving to unpack in the morning. Flicking on the living room lamp, Naomi's phone pinged with a new email. A professor from Columbia University had invited her to speak at an upcoming civil rights panel, another opportunity to amplify her experience into a transformative lesson. She padded into the kitchen, boiling water for tea, her mind wandering. The airport fiasco had ignited something inside her. Despite the fear and anger, it underscored a harsh truth: how quickly life can unravel when institutions fail to protect people. She thought back to the moment Grayson had screamed, his panic taking over as his lies unraveled before him. A shiver ran down her spine. That was the sound of immediate karma striking down corruption in real time. Sipping her tea, Naomi wandered over to the photo wall in her living room. She traced her fingers over a picture of her father, grinning beneath a worn baseball cap. The pill bottle ordeal had dredged up painful memories, his passing, the loss that still lingered in her heart. Yet she was grateful she had held on to that little container. Even if it had caused a moment of suspicion, it had also reminded her. Carrying a piece of him meant carrying a piece of his strength. A thought bloomed in her mind. What if she could create a scholarship in her father's name? A fund for underprivileged youth interested in criminal justice reform. She had gained newfound attention and resources. Maybe it was time to pay it forward. A wave of excitement coursed through her. Setting her teacup aside, she grabbed her phone and texted Danny, "Home safe. Thank you for everything. I have a new project in mind. Let's chat soon." Across the room, Mochi purred lazily on the couch, half asleep, almost as if she approved of the idea. Naomi smiled softly. Amid all the chaos and controversy, she had found her anchor again. Sometimes, the worst storms yield the brightest rainbows, and she intended to harness that light. Weeks turned into months, but Naomi's story refused to fade from public consciousness. Major news outlets ran follow-up pieces on Officer Grayson's trial. He now faced formal charges of evidence tampering, false reporting, civil rights violations. The district attorney took a particular interest in the case, emphasizing how serious it was to falsely frame an innocent passenger. Meanwhile, Naomi's activism soared. She was invited to speak nationwide, from university panels to policy discussions in Washington, D.C. One day, she received an unexpected invitation. A popular YouTube channel, known for exposing corruption, wanted to feature her story. The channel had over 1 million subscribers. At first, Naomi was unsure. Reliving the ordeal was exhausting. But when she thought about how many people had been falsely accused and had no proof to clear their name, she made her choice. The interview went viral. Thousands of comments flooded in. Some people applauded her bravery. Others lamented the state of law enforcement and racial profiling. But one thing was clear. Her story had reignited a conversation people were desperate to have. And Naomi? She was just getting started. The conversation was uncomfortable, but necessary. Naomi's story had forced people to confront realities that many had endured in silence. Her experience wasn't unique, and that was the most unsettling part. It had simply been caught on camera. One afternoon, Lieutenant Hoffman reached out with an update. Vega has joined a special task force focused on eradicating racial profiling in aviation security. Real policy changes are finally in motion. Naomi closed her eyes for a moment, letting the weight of that victory settle in. For so long, conversations about reform had felt like empty promises. But now, the first steps towards structural change were being drafted. It wasn't fast, it wasn't enough, but it was a beginning. One morning, Naomi received a letter from an unfamiliar return address. The handwriting was neat but hesitant. She unfolded the paper. "Miss Carter, I know apologies can't fix what you went through, but I'm sending you my sincere regret for my part in not speaking up sooner. I was complicit in letting you be targeted by Grayson. I should have stepped in. I'm working to do better, Officer Hayes." Naomi read it twice. At first, resentment flickered. After all, Hayes had stood by while Grayson nearly destroyed her life. But then, a gentler understanding formed. People were flawed, often afraid, often constrained by power structures bigger than themselves. And yet, a quiet step toward accountability was still a step forward. She decided to write back, not to absolve him, but to encourage him to follow Vega's lead in advocating for real reform. That same week, Naomi signed a book deal. Her sudden rise in prominence had led to a publisher's interest in her existing work on social justice. Now she would expand it into a personal memoir, a detailed account of the airport ordeal, the toxic systems that enabled it, the power of collective action. The publisher suggested a working title, Pulled Aside: How One Airport Ordeal Shined a Light on Injustice. Naomi felt the title captured her journey perfectly. What had begun in humiliation and terror had evolved into a clarion call for truth. She had no illusions that the fight was over. But for the first time, she believed she had helped shift the needle, even if only a little, toward justice. Before finalizing her book draft, Naomi made a difficult decision. She would return to San Diego International Airport, not for a flight, but to confront the ghosts of that day, to gather her final thoughts for the memoir's last chapter. The moment she stepped into Terminal 2, a rush of déjà vu hit her. The scuffed floors, the distant hum of boarding announcements, the faint scent of fast food and disinfectant. But now, she walked through the terminal with confidence, no longer the frightened passenger at the mercy of an abusive officer, but a vocal advocate recognized for her survival story. She lingered near the security lines, watching travelers shuffle forward, removing belts and shoes just as she had that day. Then she spotted something new, a TSA poster prominently displayed near the checkpoint. It read, "Ensuring fair and respectful treatment for all." Below it, a notice about the new training module addressing implicit bias, a policy pushed forward by Vega's task force. It wasn't a cure-all, but it was progress. As Naomi stood there, a light tap on her shoulder startled her. She turned and found Vega standing there in plain clothes, a lunch tote slung over her shoulder. Naomi's eyes widened. "Vega?" The officer smiled. "Just got off my shift, saw you wandering around and thought I'd say hello." "Research for your book?" Naomi nodded. "Yeah. Just soaking it all in one last time." Vega's face brightened. "Things are better. Not perfect, but better." She exhaled. "The new protocols?" "Some of them stuck. Hayes has been supportive too. Hoffman's cracking down. The Grayson case is in the final verdict stage. Rumor says he'll face jail time." Naomi listened, her heart heavy yet hopeful. She thought back to Grayson's final enraged scream. The moment his carefully woven lie unraveled before his eyes. He had tried to ruin her. But in the end, he had only destroyed himself. Immediate karma. Vega peered at Naomi's face carefully. "You all right?" Naomi inhaled the bustling airport air and exhaled the weight of that morning, once and for all. "I think so," she said softly. "I just needed to come back, close a chapter." They stood in companionable silence, watching passengers navigate the security lines. A child giggled nearby. An elderly woman sipped her coffee. A family frantically checked passports. Life continued. Naomi brushed invisible dust from her sleeve. "Thank you, Vega, for everything." The officer smiled, one of pride and gratitude. "No, thank you," she said. "Because of your story, real change is happening. Don't forget that." Naomi felt those words settle deep in her chest. She took one last look at the security line, then turned and left Terminal 2 behind, ready to finish her story. 6 months after the airport ordeal, Naomi stood in the auditorium of the Brooklyn Public Library. She was there for a reading of her newly published memoir, Pulled Aside: How One Airport Ordeal Shined a Light on Injustice. The space was packed. Local residents, college students, activists, and in the front row, her mother, eyes brimming with pride. A hush fell over the crowd as Naomi stepped up to the lectern. She read aloud from a passage describing the moment Grayson demanded yet another search. How her heart pounded. How her mind reeled as he dug through her belongings with increasing aggression. Then, The moment he pulled out a mysterious bag of powder, Naomi's voice didn't tremble this time. Words that had once made her quake with fear now stood as a testament to resilience. She reached the part where Ryan, the gate agent, had revealed the security footage. She glanced up and saw heads nodding, eyes glistening with tears. By the time she finished the excerpt, the audience erupted into applause. The power of shared empathy hit her like a wave. People understood. They saw how easily a life could be derailed and how crucial it was to stand up against injustice. After the reading, a long line of attendees formed, each waiting for a signed copy or a brief conversation. Among them, a grandmotherly figure clasped Naomi's hands. Her voice trembled. "My son went through something similar years ago. He didn't have proof, so he pled guilty to a smaller charge. Thank you for shedding light on this." Naomi's throat constricted with emotion. She squeezed the woman's hands. "Through stories we find solidarity," she said softly. "Through truth we find hope." The woman nodded, tears in her eyes. As the event wound down, Naomi noticed a tall man approaching. His demeanor was gentle, a ball cap in his hands. For a moment she didn't recognize him. Then, her breath hitched. "Officer Hayes?" He nodded, a bit sheepishly. "I saw the flyer for your book reading. Figured I'd come by, pay my respects. Also, I wanted to let you know, Grayson was officially convicted last week." Naomi exhaled sharply, relief washing over her. That's good to hear." She paused. "Thank you for telling me." Hayes hesitated. Then, in a low voice, he said, "I'm sorry I didn't intervene sooner. Grayson had a way of intimidating people, but that's no excuse." Naomi studied him. For a long time, she had felt nothing but anger toward him. But now, she saw the weight of his guilt. "We all make choices under pressure," she said carefully. "You've been working to correct that path, right?" Hayes nodded. "Yes, I'm trying." They parted with a courteous handshake. As Naomi gathered her things to leave, she felt the lingering warmth of the auditorium. Every story shared, every lesson learned, had made the world just a fraction brighter. In the days following Grayson's conviction, Naomi's inbox overflowed. Some messages were from old classmates or people she barely knew, offering congratulations and thanks. Others were from strangers, people who had faced wrongful searches, false accusations, asking for advice on how to cope or demand accountability. Naomi realized her platform wasn't just about giving speeches. It was about building a network, one that would support those who felt voiceless. One day, she received an invitation from the Aviation Equity Coalition. They wanted her to join their board. Their goal? Propose legislation to protect travelers from discriminatory searches, ensure transparency in how anonymous tips were verified. Naomi was flattered, but more than that, she felt a deep sense of responsibility. Without hesitation, she accepted. Late one evening, Naomi sat at her kitchen table, reviewing coalition paperwork. Her eyes drifted to the old pill bottle still tucked in her purse. The label was faded, barely legible, but she had never parted with it. Because in a way, it was the catalyst that had exposed Grayson's corruption. A simple keepsake from her father had led to his unmasking. Her father's memory, so intimately tied to that small bottle, now symbolized resilience, the unstoppable pursuit of truth. Just then her phone buzzed. A text from Vega. Update: the force officially adopted mandatory body cameras for searches. Penalties for not following procedure are stricter now. Progress. Naomi grinned. This was how real change took shape. One new rule, one new policy, one new perspective at a time. She stood, opening her apartment window, letting in the soft city breeze. In the distance, the lights of Manhattan flickered against the night sky. Beside her, Mochi hopped onto the windowsill, purring at the nocturnal sights. Naomi scratched behind her ears, feeling a sense of peace. The storm had passed, and in its wake came the dawn of something better. The lights from Manhattan illuminated the horizon, a dazzling mosaic of glass and steel. It was a city of contrasts, where glamorous skyscrapers stood alongside the deep-rooted inequities that followed people of color daily. Naomi knew this firsthand, but her story had proven something else, too. That immediate karma could strike where least expected. And while not every wrongful accusation ended with justice served, the example she had set might embolden others to speak out. She pressed a gentle hand against the pill bottle tucked inside her purse. A symbol of resilience, a reminder of the father she carried with her every day. Then, she settled at her laptop, fingers hovering over the keyboard. A new op-ed piece had been forming in her mind for weeks, a call to action, a blueprint for real change. She typed the title, Beyond the Search: How We Can Reimagine Airport Security for All. The words flowed effortlessly, infused with gratitude for the allies who had stood beside her, conviction in the power of speaking out, an unshakable belief that justice was possible if enough people demanded it. She ended the piece with a simple truth. If each of us stands firm against injustice, those storms of prejudice might finally clear, revealing a path to genuine equality. She leaned back, exhaling deeply. The journey had been harrowing, but it had also been transformative. Naomi's ordeal had begun as a routine airport trip, but it had escalated into a battle for justice. Through bold allies, hidden camera footage, and the power of speaking out, she had found an unexpected triumph, and in the process she had discovered a renewed sense of purpose. This story is more than just one woman's experience. It's a reminder that injustice thrives in silence, that systems don't change unless people challenge them, and that even when the odds seem stacked against us, justice is worth fighting for. If you believe in shining a light on untold stories, if you believe in sparking critical conversations, if you believe in inspiring a better, fairer future for all, then stand with us. Like, share, subscribe. Together, we can amplify voices that need to be heard. Together, we can demand change. Together, we can ensure that justice is never left to chance. This marks the end of Naomi's journey for now, but the fight for justice, equity, and accountability never truly ends. Thank you for experiencing this heart-pounding journey of courage and truth. Let it serve as a reminder that the smallest voices can create the biggest ripples, and that one person speaking out can inspire a movement that changes everything.